So, for years, we've all been told that China is this unstoppable economic juggernaut, right? But if you look closely today, there are literally tens of millions of apartments just sitting there, completely empty, locked behind sealed gates. You've got these massive, unfinished skyscrapers just gathering dust. The engine of the world's second largest economy has, well, it's pretty much ground to a halt. So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep and unpack exactly how this booming real estate sector turned into what you might call a silent financial winter.
To really wrap our heads around this massive global issue, we're going to systematically peel back the layers. We'll start with a silent financial winter, look at the manufactured scarcity myth, the shadow debt pyramid, the calculated kill switch, a broken social contract, and finally, wrap up with the global contagion.
Okay, $20 trillion. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of household wealth that has just been wiped out from the Chinese middle class. And to put that number into perspective for you, it's actually larger than the entire GDP of China itself. I mean, this isn't just a regular recession. It is literally the erasure of life savings for an entire generation.
And, you might be wondering why this collapse is so uniquely devastating. Well, in China, real estate isn't just about having a roof over your head. It's basically a financial vault. The average Chinese family locks a massive 70% of their life savings right into concrete. Compare that to just 35% here in the US. So when those home prices plummet, their primary store of value literally crumbles into dust.
Which brings us to part one, the manufactured scarcity myth. We really have to ask, how exactly did an entire nation get tricked into buying nearly 100 million empty boxes?
While the public was sold this meticulously crafted illusion of permanent scarcity. Through the 14th Five-Year Plan, the state mandated this huge 65% urbanization target, basically pushing the narrative that endless waves of rural citizens were going to flood into the cities. It was a classic psychological trap. Buy now or you're going to be priced out forever. But the crazy thing? The underlying demand was a total mirage. The reality is, by 2021, the population had essentially stagnated, and right now, it's rapidly aging and shrinking.
So why build all these skyscrapers if the demand was totally fake? Actually, the answer goes all the way back to the 1994 fiscal reform. This was a massive tax overhaul that centralized revenue. It enriched the central government, but left local municipalities holding the bag. They had to pay these huge civic bills for healthcare, education, you name it, infrastructure. Desperate for cash, local governments turned to selling land, and it got so out of hand that land sales eventually made up over 50% of their budgets. They basically became addicted to a booming real estate market just to keep the lights on in their cities.
Moving on to part two, the shadow debt pyramid. Now, there was a major catch here. Local governments had strict borrowing limits, so to keep extracting that cash from the middle class, they needed a workaround. Enter LGFVs, or local government financing vehicles. These were state-backed companies that acted as, hidden fiscal engines. They allowed local governments to borrow absolutely astronomical sums of money, completely off the official public books. And they just funneled this endless cash into high-speed rails to nowhere, massive empty plazas, and these sprawling residential ghost towns. And it was all done for one reason, to keep that land sale cash flowing. And man, this engine ran hot. It generated a staggering $9 trillion of hidden shadow debt. I mean, to put that in perspective, that was roughly half of China's GDP at the time. Financial experts actually viewed these LGFVs as the black holes of the Chinese economy. Those famous ghost cities you've seen on the news? They were never planning errors. No way. They were deliberate debt extraction zones, built purely to convert raw land into cold hard cash.
The craziest part is that this entire $60 trillion bubble functioned exactly like a classic pyramid scheme. Like in the US, you might put down a small deposit on an unbuilt house, right? But under China's pre-sale model, buyers were taking out massive mortgages to pay 100% upfront for what were literally just blueprints. Then, developers completely ignored escrow rules, instantly using that buyer cash to buy more overpriced land from the local governments. The whole shebang relied on a constant, desperate influx of new buyers at the bottom just to fund the mirage at the top.
And that brings us to part three, the calculated kill switch. Because a bubble built entirely on pre-sales and shadow debt definitely has an expiration date. Eventually, the music had to stop. Now, a lot of Western observers looked at this and assumed the collapse was just some bureaucratic accident. But it wasn't. In 2020, Beijing deliberately rolled out the 3 red lines policy. This imposed absolutely strict debt ratios on property developers. If you failed to meet them, boom, your credit lines were instantly frozen.
This was a controlled demolition, a highly calculated move to stop developers from endlessly piling on leverage and threatening the core state-owned banking system.
By cutting off those institutional credit lines, the state triggered a massive intentional liquidity crisis. It unleashed a $100 billion default wave, totally annihilating over 50 development firms since 2021. I mean, absolute titans of industry just fell overnight. You had Evergrande, which was once the most valuable real estate company on earth, collapsing under $300 billion in liabilities. And then they were quickly followed by Country Garden and its massive global portfolio.
Which leads right into part 4, a broken social contract. Because popping that bubble might have saved the state banks, but it was ordinary citizens who ended up paying the ultimate price.
The state essentially treated its own middle class as a strategic crumple zone in this economic crash. They left citizens holding the bag, legally bound to keep paying mortgages on millions of unfinished concrete shells. And as you can imagine, the psychological fallout has been just immense. Beyond these unprecedented nationwide mortgage boycotts, we're seeing the rise of Tang Ping, or the lying flat movement. Young people are watching their futures evaporate, so they're just checking out. They're refusing to participate in a wealth generation machine that they've realized is fundamentally rigged against them.
All right, part 5, the global contagion. As we zoom out from the domestic situation, we really have to ask ourselves, how does a collapse of this sheer magnitude affect the rest of the world?
Is this just an isolated domestic crisis? Well, it's pretty easy to sit here in the West and feel totally insulated from it. But assuming this is just a localized issue is a really dangerous mistake. Because the fallout from this financial winter is actively bypassing borders right as we speak.
The first major ripple we're seeing is massive capital flight. As panicked citizens and investors realize their domestic assets are literally vanishing, they are rushing to funnel whatever wealth they have left into Western real estate. We're talking about huge amounts of money pouring into major global cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Vancouver, London, and Sydney. This artificial surge in demand is just driving up global property prices and quietly pricing local hardworking families right out of their own real estate markets.
And it goes even deeper than that. Independent analysts are pointing to a much more profound paradigm shift. They're suggesting that this ghost city model is actually a real-world testing ground for what you might call a post-ownership society. Basically, it's a system where middle-class ownership is actively dismantled and replaced by a reality where massive corporate or state entities own everything, and citizens are just forced to lease their existence.
So how exactly does a state manage a population that's been stripped of its conventional property wealth? Through digital infrastructure. Enter the ECNY, the digital yuan. Now, this isn't your normal digital money. It is entirely programmable and perfectly traceable. In fact, civil servants are already being paid in it, and a broad retail rollout is set for 2026. Think about what that means. It allows the central government to literally put expiration dates on your money to force consumer spending, or instantly freeze your funds in real time as a social credit penalty. So as institutional smart money all over the world flees these fragile paper assets for tangible commodities, it really leaves us with a provocative question. Are we just watching the collapse of the Chinese real estate market? Or are we witnessing the dawn of a completely new economic paradigm? A world where the very concept of private property is nothing but a distant memory. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Definitely keep your eyes open because this contagion, it's really just getting started.